و یه شاگرده شما
So, joining us today is Firoozeh Dumas, who's the author of the books Funny in Farsi and Laughing Without an Accent. She was born in Iranian oil country and then came to Whittier, California in grade school, then returning a few years later. She's a graduate of Cal Berkeley and, as her book notes, is a survivor of having spent her teenage years in Newport Beach, California.
Totally.
She's been nominated for the Thurber Prize for American Humor, losing to Jon Stewart, which is an honor in itself, and an Audie Award for Best Audio Book of the Year. She is here today because her first book, Funny in Farsi, has been made required reading for all entering FIU freshmen this year. And it's just, personally and professionally, I'm just thrilled about this. First off, I really adore the book. And professionally, as someone who teaches geography of the Middle East, besides the fact the first chapter is about a map, which I really like, it's the fact that there will exist at FIU this whole cohort of students who already know that the Middle East is a place where people have real lives of love and happiness, joy and sorrow, excitement and boredom, and that aren't so different from their own. And so when I talk about the fact that Iran actually has a cuisine, or that there's music videos made in Beirut, or football in Cairo, or that migrants from the Middle East to the United States do quite well, they won't be completely shocked, as they are now. They have music videos? What? And so professionally, it's quite thrilling to me. But also the book, what I really enjoyed was Ms. Dumas's superhuman attention to detail, which I just, especially in people's relationship to the world around them, which as a geographer is something I focus on. And whether it be the world on their television, or the supermarket, or Disneyland, or trying to decipher the mysterious world of colloquialisms in a foreign language. And reading the book made me think of the ending of one of my favorite movies, which was True Stories, which was written by the lead singer of the Talking Heads, David Byrne. And he concludes the film by noting, quote, "I really enjoy forgetting. When I first come to a place, I notice all the little details. I notice the way the sky looks, the color of white paper, the way people walk, doorknobs, everything. Then I get used to a place, and I don't notice these things anymore. It's only by forgetting can I see the place again as it really is." And what Ms. Dumas's amazing gift is that she can still see the color of white paper after all these years. And I'm so glad you've been able to share that with your readers. And I also really enjoyed the fact that it took a while for your family to figure out why, when you guys said you were from Persia, everyone complimented you on your beautiful cats. So without further, is she first up? Or,
Sure.
Please welcome Firoozeh Dumas.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that generous introduction. Will you be my publicist? I think. Well, I really didn't know I was going to be speaking at all today. I thought it was just going to be a Q&A. So just real quickly, I wanted to say that I think that the reason why I even have a story to tell is because I came to America at a time when nobody here had really heard of Iran. And having lived through the Iranian Revolution here, I witnessed firsthand how much this country changed, how much attitudes of Americans changed towards Iranians. And I don't know if you were at my talk today, but I literally felt like, thank you. I went from, within 24 hours, being from this country where no one could find us on a map, no one knew anything about us, to being from this country who already hated us. And it was really, for me, just eye-opening to realize, how much power the media has in their depiction of other cultures and other countries. And when I first started speaking on the lecture circuit, I remember I was at a junior high, and this little boy came up to me after my speech, and he said, I'm from Colombia, and everybody just thinks of drugs when they think of Colombia. And I'll tell you, it kind of made my heart skip a beat, because I thought, that's really true. Like that is, maybe not Shakira too, but yeah. I think more drugs. And we for some reason tend to take the various cultures and reduce them to just one soundbite, one image. And I think this is where artists come in, either through writing stories or paintings or taking photographs, is just showing the other sides. And there are so many sides, of course, to every culture. So thank you again for inviting me here. I really, it's always an honor to be invited to school and to have an opportunity to share my story with you. And I would love to open this up to your questions. So
Now, I truly have to say that as somebody who has both a love of literature and an interest in how cultures interact with one another, these books are absolutely brilliant because in their depiction of the very specific and unique practices, idiosyncrasies, etc., of you, your family members, and the cultural characteristics of Iranians, you actually uncover so many truly universal experiences that immigrant families encounter. And I think you just do it so beautifully because, on the one hand, you have this exquisite insight into what makes Iranians special, and yet, at the same time, you could imagine these parents, the father who thinks he speaks the language but doesn't, the mother who's unwilling to learn. You could transfer them to Yiddish or Hispanic or Chinese or so many other cultures so that you get a very, very universal message out of it. And I think that that's truly what great art does, in that it makes that balance of conveying the universal through the very specific. And I think you do that, and you do it so joyously. You know, what amazes me about these books is how much real insight you convey, but a page doesn't go by that I don't break out laughing aloud. I mean, I can't read these books in public because I just start laughing. This is not a dentist office or an airplane book, unless you want people to think you're crazy, because you just go into rollicking laughter. And by the way, one last thing I'll say before I stop.
No, keep going.
You mentioned, I want to give other people a chance to talk, but you mentioned in one of the books, I can't keep straight which is which book, but you mentioned about how in Iran, each sale of a book represents maybe 8 or 10 readers or more, because the book is passed around. This book I gave to my mother, or I loaned to my mother, who loaned it to my sister, who loaned it to my cousin, and I consider myself indeed fortunate that I was able to get it back at all. So, in any event, if you haven't read these books, I really, really highly recommend them.
Professor Cohen has dwelt on the universal aspects of your writing, but there's also in your writing a great deal of specificity. You are Iranian, you're Muslim, you're from the Middle East, and you're in a country that previously had very good relations with Iran, but now it doesn't have good relations with Iran. So you're in a kind of a double jeopardy situation. So I do want to dwell on the specifics without, in fact, praising you for not committing the error of exceptionalism, which comes through to the universality in your books. In other words, you appeal to a universal experience that all immigrants have, but at the same time, you're able to capture the specificity of your own individual background and your own Muslim experience in living in the United States at the age of 7. I came to the United States at the age of 13, so it was
Where are you from?
Cuba. We're from Cuba. In the 1970s, my experience and our experience in South Florida with the Muslim community happened primarily through the Pakistanis who came in droves to study at Miami-Dade. I remember seeing them in Miami-Dade. And guess what? Their children are our students here at FIU. And they are Muslim Americans, Middle Eastern Americans, and they speak Spanish. My friends from Pakistani Muslim friends from Hialeah speak Hialeah Spanish, Cuban Spanish. And they drink cafecito, and when we go together to restaurants, they order in Cuban. I don't want to say Spanish, because Cuban is his own dialect. And they still live where they grew up. So in a sense, that's an interaction that the immigrant community in Miami is basically quite interesting, because they're only Hispanics. But we have many people from Middle Eastern backgrounds or Muslim backgrounds that live in this city. So that has been my experience. And I think your writing, would appeal to them as much as it would appeal to us Hispanics, given our immigrant roots here. Now, Miami is a unique place for immigrants of Middle Eastern descent, because as one family in Boston told me, we want to move to South Florida because there we blend in. We don't stick out like a sore thumb, which is another issue in your writing. How a Muslim or a Middle Eastern sticks out, particularly after 9/11, and you become very self-conscious of your presence. You know you're being observed in some way. My own experience, because I've been told I look Middle Eastern, specifically Iranian. I remember I dated in college an Iranian student who giggled throughout the date, saying I reminded her one of the Iranian religious leaders. And of course, the date didn't go anywhere after being identified with. Right.
But Khomeini.
Yeah, no, I don't think it was. I think she said something to somebody else. But anyways, my point is that I also feel as an immigrant, the kind of self-consciousness that you develop living in a strange land. I remember going to Boston to a conference, and I was in the airplane. I went to the lavatories, and the two people stood up and stood in front between me and the lavatories because it was in the front. And all of a sudden I realized that I was being profiled. I was being singled out because of my beard and because of my looks. So those are kinds of very specific things that immigrants alone can identify with that are not universal characteristics but apply to us in particular. And I think you touched very well on those issues. But at this time, of course, you try to humanize us, which is a very, very important thing. Now, as one family said to me again, we want to come to Miami, we want to come to South Florida because here we feel safe. And that's an interesting way, turn of phrase. We feel safe. We feel that we don't stick out. We're not exceptional. We blend in. We belong. And it's a wonder of South Florida that people from different backgrounds, Hispanic or Middle Eastern, Arabic, Muslim, Christian, can find a home here. And I hope Miami becomes a model for what the United States should become. Although, if I read him correctly, Samuel Huntington feared precisely that Miami would become like the United States would become like Miami, because it would mean then that the American identity, by which he meant the hegemony and dominance of the Anglo-Saxon culture, would be challenged, and obviously wasn't happy with that. So perhaps Miami will not replace Dearborn, Michigan, but it will certainly be a close second to welcoming people of different places. And through your work, people who do not look like us will see us not as threats, but as members of this incredible community called the United States. However, there's a asymmetry between Middle Eastern or Muslim immigration to the United States, reference in your work, and the immigrations of Hispanics, people like me, is that Muslims, as I read in the paper, the Arabs or the people of the Middle East did not create Islam. It was the other way around. Islam created you. So Islam is inextricably bound with your identity. In the way, for instance, that Catholicism is not bound with our identity. We can be Protestants and we can be Catholics and we're still Hispanics first. But not with the Middle Eastern people, I suspect. If I am incorrect, please correct me. So there's a loyalty, there's a fierce loyalty to your identity that cannot be separated from you without mutilating you in some sense. That is very, very important. And that's the point of specificity versus the universalism. You are specifically a Middle Eastern person, Middle Eastern woman, and you're a Muslim. And you are from a country and from a culture that is perceived in the West as being not only not Judeo-Christian, but anti-Judeo-Christian. And that is a stigma that I think goes all the way back to the Middle Ages, and of course that has been accentuated by the whole crisis of 2000, of 9/11, 2001. So I remember in one of your writings that you mentioned that in one Christmas birthday party, the Iranian group, because they didn't want to be singled out as Iranians or Middle Eastern, sang Happy Birthday in English rather than in Farsi, and that is something that we ourselves, of course, growing up in South Florida in the 60s, when we came in the 60s, we felt very self-conscious that we wanted to look or be as American as we possibly could, because there was some sort of stigma also attached to our being from another culture, particularly non-Western, non-European, Anglo-Saxon culture. So we all wanted to blend in. But Muslims have this particular feature that makes them more like the Jewish diaspora. Your faith, right? More than your country of origin, counts more and defines more who you are. You are indeed strangers on a strange land, exactly like the Jews. And even when you gather in Washington to pray for America, there are enough detractors and doubters who cast doubts and aspersions on your motives and sincerity. It seems as if you want to belong, but you can't, because there's too much against you. And that's what you're trying to fight against. You're fighting against the tide in your work. That is not a burden then that is not easy. That is the burden that is not easily shed. As it was said of the Jews in the 19th century, to many people in the United States, Muslims, Middle Easterns, Persians are all thrown in together, are not assimilable to the mainstream of American life, and we will refer it always as an unassimilable Semitic element that simply cannot be integrated into the life of an American. Again, your work is distinguished by combating those stereotypes and fighting against the tide and saying that, yes, we do belong here and we can be here and we can be just as American, but at the same time, we are who we are. And we cannot also deny that other part of ourselves without mutilating ourselves. I am concerned, however, that, and this is something that I think is a challenge for you, for me, for everybody here, that the major challenge for America is, will it force everybody to assimilate? Will we feel so much nostalgia as I see in Lou Dobbs, and I see in Glenn Beck, and I see in Sean Hannity, and nostalgia for a land where all the differences were obliterated, and a much more homogeneous culture that is Anglo-Saxon Western culture was created or was emerged out of that melting pot. Whether that will be the America that, through fear, we will go back to, or whether we will be an America that will embrace the kinds of differences that you celebrate in your work. And I accept the fact that we will be intrinsically and inevitably, unalterably, a multi-ethnic, multi-religious nation. I am frankly not sure which way the country is going to go, but certainly I'm sure that your work will contribute to making sure that America goes in that direction. How much of your own exceptionalism you would want to keep in your culture, how much will our children, your children's will keep that kind of exceptionalism, which is integral and necessary to your own identity, is a question that all of us are asking. I know my sons have already answered that question. My son is a heavy metal guitar player. He hardly speaks Spanish. And he doesn't know anything about Latin music or salsa or cafecito. And I don't know whether that will be the way for the future. But thank you very much for your work and your information. Thank you very much.
Even so, when I lived in Iran before the revolution, it was always very clear to me that in other countries, the Muslims in other countries practice in a different way, or they interpreted a lot of things differently. I remember always being told like how tough it was for women in Saudi Arabia. And it wasn't so much, because of the religion, but somehow it was the culture woven in with their interpretation of the religion. And so, but I think oftentimes people in the West, when they think of Muslims, they think of like a blank, like a woman in a burqa, for example. I never in my life have seen a woman in a burqa, because that was really Afghanistan. No woman in Iran have I ever seen wear a burqa. So there is a huge gradation. And that's often misunderstood. And so when people say, well, are you a Muslim? And I say, well, if I were to give 10 words describing myself, Muslim wouldn't not be in the top 10. Because religion has not played a big role in identifying who I am. However, it's a culture I grew up with, so I'm very comfortable with it. And 90% of what I hear about like quotes from the Islam in the media are wrong. I don't know where the heck people are finding them. Nowhere does it say you will have 70 virgins if you go to, I don't know where that came from. I think Lou Dobbs, somebody made that. Sean Hannity, I don't know. There's just so many things that are wrong. And if you guys, by the way, there's one book I really recommend if you want to learn more about Islam. It's an easy to read book, and it's written by a woman who actually is a practicing Muslim. And she's a Stanford grad. The book is called The Muslim Next Door. And it answers everything. Have you read it? Have you heard of it? Well, it really answers all the questions. And she's a devout Muslim, but like also she loves Star Trek. And she's a practicing Muslim. So unlike me, she's really a spokesperson.
If you haven't read the book, I think this is one of the greatest passages in the book here. It says when you were getting the book translated, that's one of my favorite chapters, when you're getting it translated into Persian so that it isn't like hijacked and translated by somebody incompetent. And there are, so many hysterical scenes in this chapter where he talks about how culturally certain things are hard to translate. So when you were talking about Santa Claus, a bearded man coming down the chimney, you say that in Iran, a bearded fellow coming down the chimney is not a happy thought. The idea of going to bed, so a bearded man, Khomeini perhaps, could come down the chimney would not cause visions of sugar plums dancing in anyone's head. Instead, one would to find frantic people packing their belongings fast. But my favorite part in here is where it says that you were forced to remove an entire chapter in this book called the Ham Amendment, which is about exactly that thing with your father liking to sneak a little bit of ham now and then. I said, in that chapter, which I considered the soul of my book, I explain my father's philosophy that it does not matter what we eat or whether we are Muslim, Christian, or Jewish. It's how we treat our fellow man that counts. The censor did not agree. When I told my father about the removal of that particular chapter, he was very upset. He said it was probably because the censor did not believe in shared humanity, at least not with Jews. My father also added that my next book should be entitled Accomplishments of Jews I Have Known, interspersed with recipes using ham.
Do I add or do I melt? No, you know what, first of all, I think, going back to something you said about whether or not a lot of Americans afraid that this country is becoming brown or beige or whatever. I think, unfortunately, yes. I think there are a lot of Americans who are saying, wait a second, I don't want all these brown people coming in. And I don't think they have a say. I mean, I think, the wave goes where it goes. So those people are going to have to assimilate. The white people, not the. Anyways, I mean, I think assimilation goes both ways. You have to get used to the fact that maybe your next door neighbor will be from Pakistan one day. And I know there's a lot of people who wouldn't want that right now. They say, I don't want a Pakistani neighbor. But you know what? It just might happen. I think that, I always say this, I have to live in a town, because I travel a lot now in the United States. I have to live in a town where, Jews can be Jewish and homosexuals can be homosexual. Because if that exists, then I can be there, be fine, and I'm, and I think that I do add spice. I think we all add spice. I think even people who've been here for 5 generations, from Minnesota, they add spice too. And I'm not one of these people who sees our contribution in terms of where we're from. I think it's the kind of person we are, and I think that's the most important thing. Ever since I became a writer, people will say to me, do you consider yourself Iranian or American or this or that? I've never thought of myself in any of those terms. I mean, this is really going to sound cliche, but I think of myself as a really nice person. That I feel like that's what I contribute. And I'm amazed sometimes when I do travel places, and just from the questions people ask me, I realize they're seeing me as a Muslim, Middle Eastern immigrant. They have this whole identity where I'm more loves to cook, things that I think don't have anything to do with a culture or a specific culture. And I think it's wonderful. So far, just from what I've seen from Miami, I think it's wonderful, all these different pipes. We should bring on into here. Yeah?
Yes, we should.
Yeah.
You and I came from practically the same generation of immigrants. So for us, the assimilation model, the melting pot model worked. We don't speak Iranian or Cuban, we speak American. That's why we're not a threat, that's why you're getting published, so that's why you're a bestseller. But the next generation of immigrants, the melting pot model is not working. The mechanism is not working because immigration now, because of globalization, is so open-ended that people are keeping their background languages, their background cultures, and they're traveling back to their home country in the ways that previous generations could not do that. So what do you see as the challenge to this new generation of immigrants who are going to keep their immigrant identity and never go ahead and make the transition, this quote, successful transition to the melting pot? What language do they speak? Is there an Americanese language that transcends both the Anglo-Saxon civilization that shaped this country for 350 years, and now a new emerging language that is going to be multi-ethnic and multicultural? How do you see the future?
Well, let me say this. I live in Silicon Valley, and I see Silicon Valley as a real model for assimilation, because when you look at all these high-tech companies, half of their employees are foreign-born, and a lot of their CEOs are immigrants as well. And the one thing that made these people, able to get jobs was their ability. And I think as far as assimilation goes, the bottom line is what can you contribute? So I think it really comes down to the individual. I mean, I'm not somebody who I feel like I have this cousin. Wait, is this being taped? Yeah. I have a friend, and just by you. No, I have a friend, let's just say, who has not assimilated in this country. He's been here about 10 years, not assimilated, and blames it on America. And it's so interesting to me because he has such a bad attitude about everything. And I've said to him many times, I've said, you know, maybe it's your attitude. He goes, no, it's this country. It's the people and the way they treat me. And it's very interesting to me because I think that's a trap we can all fall into, is really blaming, you know, we can make it sound almost like an intellectual argument. But I think if people are not assimilating and they want to, I think they have to look in the mirror. Because I still think that there are enough, you know, look, Rush Limbaugh is not the majority in this country. I mean, I'm very sorry that people like him have such a voice in the media.
He is large.
He is large in many ways. He is large. But I still think a majority of people in this country are open-minded. And I think it does come down to the kind of person that you are. How does being Middle Eastern affect me in my daily life as a writer? As, you know, I feel like, again, I think because I was here before the Iranian Revolution and I experienced a very different America, I feel like I want to keep reminding people of what America was like and what it can be like. The worst thing, I would never want America to become like France in the way that, like, I don't know how much you know about like the problem that exists in France with their immigrant populations, but they have like a lot of North Africans who are born actually in France. I mean, they're French citizens, but they can never actually become a part of the French society. And I just want to make sure that America never becomes there, and it becomes like that. And I get so scared when I hear, again, going back to like Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh and Glenn, because I think those people are just like poisoning this culture. I think those are, you know, and they're laughing all the way to the bank. You know, I don't think that, I don't even know if they even believe in what they're saying. They're just knowing it gets them a lot of listeners. But I just want to make sure I can do what I can do as one person to make sure that this country doesn't just have this knee-jerk reaction to saying, you know what, we just hate all immigrants. You know, we hate the Mexicans, we hate the Middle Easterners, we hate, you know, it's a long list. Because, I mean, let's not forget, the strength of this country has always been based on letting immigrants in and then allowing them to become the best version of themselves and then contributing to this society. So, yes?
I have a non-political question.
Non-political question.
How did you become a writer?
How did I become a writer? Well, I spoke at this at length today through my talk, but, you know, my father's a storyteller. So, and he's a truly magnificent storyteller. I mean, he will go to the grocery store and buy tomatoes and come back and talk about it in a way that you wish that you had gone with him to buy it. So, you know, when I had kids, I thought I really want my kids to just understand a little bit about my childhood and what I had to learn at a very early age. And, you know, when I was 7 and we came here, it was like coming to another planet. I mean, everything was different. But after a while, once I got to know people, Americans, I realized they're not that different. And so I really just wanted to convey that very simple message to my kids. So that was how I started. I joined a writers group.
Has any sort of that background in Iranian literature had any impact?
You know who has had a big influence on me is Mullah Nasruddin. Because I grew up on Mullah Nasruddin. Mullah Nasruddin is a character, every country claims him in the Middle East. They all say, you know, oh, he's this, he's Turkish, he's that. But he's like this vagabond and a very clever guy who, he's just like a Sufi. And there's always little anecdotes about him, and he's always outwitting the people in power, and his stories are very funny, but they always have a moral. And in Iran, everything that you do, someone says, oh, that reminds me of a Mullah Nasruddin story. So, and Aesop's fables, which are not Iranian, but that, you know, they're kind of similar in that way. Okay, so I'll tell you guys a story. So I got this email. I flew here yesterday morning. I left California yesterday morning. Right before I came, I checked my email, and I had this message from a reporter in the United Arab Emirates. And he said that he had read in the LA Times about a comment that I had made about Islam and wanted to know if he could get my books and wanted to write about me for the Gulf paper that he works for. And I thought that's really, you know, that is so 21st century that, you know, he should read the LA Times, you know. Anyways, so the comment that I had made, and I think this perhaps addresses some of what you're talking about, is I had heard, are you guys familiar with the writer Ayaan Hirsi Ali? She's a Somali, yeah. So I was at a conference last summer, and she was, you know, giving her talk, and you know, she talks about her experience, and then sort of makes it seem as if this is really what Islam is all about, even though it's really her experience and based on her culture. And so when she gave her talk afterwards, you know, I just raised my hand and I said, well, I just want you to know that I was also raised in a Muslim country, and your experience is really foreign to me. And I just wanted to point out that there's a gray area. You know, you just cannot take 1.2 or 1.3 billion Muslims and paint them all with the same brush. So it was a very innocent comment, and I also pointed out that female genital mutilation has nothing to do with Islam. It actually predates Islam, because she was talking about it and not making it at all clear that it was not a Muslim. I mean, there's a lot of things really screwy with Islam, okay, but we didn't have that. So, well, that really annoyed her, and she, really laid it into me, and it became the sort of thing that everybody at this conference was talking about, even though I had the microphone for all of like 40 seconds. So somebody in the LA Times wrote about this, and then so this guy in the United Arab Emirates emailed me yesterday morning. And it was interesting because he said to me, he said, I know that you have your own issues with Islam, because I do. He said, however, I really appreciate that you said what needed to be said and that you defended what needed to be defended. And I think this is sort of an issue right now with Islam, because it is just painted in such black and white terms. And I oftentimes feel like the Muslims that you see on the news, it's sort of like the KKK representing Christianity. I mean, let's not forget the KKK based on their beliefs on the Bible. I mean, of course, we all know that's screwy. But when it comes to Muslim terrorists, because no one knows anything about Islam, and so there is this sort of belief like, well, Islam is terrorism, and so it's really, September 11th happened. I just thought, oh dear God, I hope Iran is not involved. And it was the same thing with the Oklahoma City bombing. My dad, I remember, called me and he said, oh God, I hope it's not Iran. But what's interesting is I knew that once they found out there's a Middle Eastern connection. It doesn't matter what country it is. We're all going to be thrown in the same pot. You too, because you look like us. So it's just if you have brown hair, watch out. That's and I'm still concerned. I mean, because I think that it's for a lot of people now, like the entire Middle East is seen as like a hotbed of terrorism. And of course it's not. I mean, if that were the case, there would be terrorism every minute of every day. And for some people, it's so hard to comprehend that what they see on the news are the terrorists. They're not seeing ordinary Middle Easterners. And it's really important that people read books or, maybe just reach out in some way to actually find out what is an ordinary Middle Easterner. Thank you again for coming, and I hope you guys keep reading about the Middle East and keep talking, and make sure you guys get some Persian food. I know some Iranians. Have you guys, is there a Persian restaurant in town? In Coral Gables?
Several.
Is it good? Is it any good?
The Shiraz down in Kendall near Dadeland.
Okay, listen people, you need to have a Persian meal at this college. Okay, that's all I have to say. All right? So I'm going to end on that. So thank you. You know that? He's at home. So thank you for all your generous words. Pleasure. I honestly. I'm excited to know what you Come on, what do you say?